I was the bride they barely acknowledged. At our wedding, my mother-in-law handed me a prenup instead of a blessing. My sister-in-law whispered, "She's only here for the money." I smiled, not because they were wrong, but because I had already bought a majority stake in the family company. That's what happens when people think silence means submission. I didn't marry into this family to be accepted. I married in to take back what they stole from someone they thought was too weak to fight. And now, I wasn't asking for a seat at the table. I was flipping it. The ballroom glistened like a dream someone else was having. Chandeliers caught every shimmer of light, scattering them across the floor like blessings I was never meant to receive. I stood at the center of it all in a dress I didn't choose, reciting vows I barely heard, to a man who held my hand too tightly and smiled just a little too wide. They clapped, they cheered, they toasted, but not for me. I was the final piece in their perfect family portrait, slotted in like furniture that matched the curtains. My family didn't come. They weren't invited. "Too far, too messy," my new mother-in-law had said with a tight smile. I remembered how her eyes swept over me during the cake tasting, the way she pursed her lips at my laugh, my posture, the way I pronounced meringue. On the morning of the wedding, she tapped on my dressing room door and handed me a box. This was Lucas's late fiancé's gown. "It fits you better than anything you could have picked." I didn't argue. I smiled and thanked her, then turned to change in silence. The silk felt like borrowed skin. Lucas kissed me in front of everyone, and I tilted my head just right for the photographs. That night, as he twirled me beneath the lights, he whispered, "You're perfect, even more than she was." My stomach turned, but I nodded. Applause swelled. I played my role. After all, the mask was part of the dress code. Weeks passed. Lucas dove into work with the zeal of a man who had already completed his biggest transaction. I saw less and less of him, sometimes just hearing the door click at midnight and again at dawn. I didn't ask questions. I made tea for his mother every morning, answered her carefully crafted small talk, and endured her sideways glances when I picked the wrong brand of olive oil or wore flats instead of heels. His sister Sabrina dropped by often, never alone. She brought friends with well-groomed laughter, the kind that prickled beneath your skin. They spoke in metaphors and coded judgment, performing polite cruelty. "You're so lucky," one of them told me over brunch. "No student debt, no rent, no job stress, just yoga and afternoon tea." I smiled. Yes, so lucky. They didn't insult me directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, they curated my life, trimming away anything inconvenient. My personal bank account froze. "Just simplify things," Lucas had said. The housekeeper began clearing out clothes I had bought years before. New ones appeared, tailored, monochrome, precisely my size, but never my style. The Wi-Fi password changed. When I asked, no one seemed to know what happened. I became an echo inside my own life. My calls to former colleagues were returned less and less. Invitations to professional conferences stopped coming. My LinkedIn vanished. At dinner one night, Sabrina laughed while scrolling her phone. "You know, you're not even Google-able anymore," she said. "It's kind of chic, like digital minimalism." Everyone chuckled. I didn't. They had stripped me down to a silhouette of convenience. I was useful only as long as I was quiet. Rumors began circulating among extended family. Some whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "She was just an assistant before, right?" Smart of Lucas to lock her down before she got ideas. Does she even know how to hold a board seat? I stirred my tea slowly and said nothing. Not yet. Then, one afternoon, while looking for a warranty for a broken espresso machine, I opened a drawer in Lucas's home office. Buried beneath manuals and golf club brochures, I found a legal folder. Curiosity was not new to me, but this folder hummed. Inside, a contract sat neatly clipped, and at the bottom, a signature. My name. Not in my handwriting. It was a document transferring voting rights and partial control of Lucas's shares to Sabrina in case of inactivity, incompetence, or marital dissolution. Effective immediately upon signing. Backdated. Clean. My fingers trembled, but my breath did not. I flipped the page slowly. Then again. Every signature matched mine perfectly. Every date, every initial. All without my knowledge. They didn't just want to silence me. They wanted to erase me. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into the room, waving the forged contract. That's what they expected from someone like me, someone who they believed didn't understand the rules of their world. Instead, I poured my mother-in-law's tea the next morning as usual. Earl Grey, 1 sugar, no lemon. She looked pleased with herself, not knowing she was sipping civility laced with quiet calculation. For the next few weeks, I became everything they believed I already was: grateful, gentle, gracious. I asked Sabrina for skincare advice. I nodded when Lucas talked over me at dinner. I let them believe their play was working while I rewrote the script. My entry point was subtle. Over dinner, I casually mentioned how I miss numbers, how sometimes I just wanted to run spreadsheets to clear my mind. Lucas laughed. Still clinging to your little audit days? I smiled. It's silly, I know. I just miss feeling useful. 2 days later, he arranged for me to shadow the company's junior accountant. A gesture of appeasement, like giving a child a toy phone to make them feel important. I was sent to a windowless office in the basement of Rivera Holdings, what they called the archive, where dusty ledgers went to die. I made friends with Paul, the only real human in that room. Paul had a soft voice and a bad knee, and he liked anyone who asked about his cats. I asked about all 6. He began slipping me old files to practice on. Just don't tell HR, he winked. They had no idea I was already fluent in their language. I had spent 10 years as a forensic auditor before I ever met Lucas. I had dissected shell companies, trailed ghost transactions, and taught seminars on ethical finance. But they had erased that version of me, and now that ghost was walking through their walls. I started small. Quarterly reports, expense logs, travel reimbursements. I noticed inconsistencies, numbers that didn't line up, invoices billed to projects that didn't exist. I mapped the names that showed up often, vendors, clients, even charities, and then cross-referenced board meeting minutes. Every thread led to one name: Sabrina. She wasn't just bleeding the company. She was doing it with precision. Under the pretense of family philanthropy and strategic investments, she rerouted company funds into dummy initiatives. One foundation she praised at brunch for feeding 1,000 families didn't exist beyond a P.O. box in Nevada. A design firm credited for rebranding their hospitality arm, her college roommate's side hustle. The genius wasn't in the theft. It was in how easy it was to hide when no one thought you were watching. I created a full chart. Names, timelines, transaction codes. I used sticky notes in neutral colors, so if anyone saw, it'd look like recipe prep or mood boards. Every night, I folded those notes back into a travel book on Florence no one ever opened. By the end of that month, I understood the ecosystem. Every cousin had a role. Every aunt received a stipend disguised as consulting. My mother-in-law sat at the center, pretending to sip tea while signing approvals that quietly drained her own legacy. I almost felt sorry for Lucas. He was the face of it all, but not the mind. He was just a brand, propped up to shield the ones truly pulling strings. Then I found it, hidden in a zip folder labeled Estate Matters, buried under HR training videos. A document titled Marital Exit Strategy, Scenario B. My breath hitched. It was a draft agreement, a divorce triggered by irreconcilable misalignment of values. It had financial clauses, behavioral expectations, image maintenance clauses, a non-disclosure segment. But the most horrifying part? The exit package. 0. In bold, it read, in the event of early exit, less than 2 years of marriage, Party B forfeits all financial claims due to insufficient contribution to family estate. Party B. That was me. They had always planned to discard me. Groom me, isolate me, control me, then extract me. I looked at the timestamp. Created 2 weeks before the wedding. Updated 3 days after the honeymoon. They didn't think I was a threat. They were wrong. They wanted me docile, so I let them think I was dumb. The trick wasn't to shout or fight, it was to mislead. I began feeding the family morsels of harmless truth wrapped in carefully planted errors. Numbers I misread, questions I misunderstood, documents I forgot to file. I'd fumble a term here, reference an old report there. Sabrina smirked more. Lucas stopped asking what I did all day. Misdirection, I learned, was more effective than defiance. Once they stopped watching me, I made my move. Using a VPN routed through a public cafe, I composed an email under the identity of a fictitious senior auditor from a well-known international compliance agency. I addressed it to one of Rivera Holdings' major stakeholders, attaching selected anomalies, carefully chosen, not enough to implicate me, just enough to spark concern. Subject: urgent, unverified transactions involving family foundation. Within 48 hours, the ripples began. A quiet buzz moved through the upper floors of the building. A scheduled meeting between the CFO and a regional director was abruptly canceled. Sabrina's assistant was asked to reformat 6 months' worth of travel invoices. By day 5, an external audit firm had been commissioned to review procedural integrity. Lucas came home that night later than usual, his jaw tense. "Some idiot triggered an inquiry," he muttered while pouring whiskey. "Probably a disgruntled intern." I nodded, folding towels. "That's unfortunate." I watched from the shadows as their confidence thinned. Lucas wasn't dumb, just distracted, and his trust in his family, particularly his sister, was stitched together by years of performance. Now, with the company under scrutiny, that fabric started to fray. One night I found him on the patio, glass in hand, staring into the dark. "You think Sabrina would ever, I don't know, take things too far?" he asked. I tilted my head. "Too far how?" He shook his head. "Never mind." I led him toward doubt, not with lies, but with silence. I gave him space to wonder, to build his own suspicions. When he questioned me about my time at the office, I told him how confusing it all was, how I hoped I wasn't screwing anything up. He patted my hand and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, just stay out of it." He had no idea how deep I was in. The investigation unsettled the house. Whispered calls behind closed doors, unexpected visits from attorneys. Sabrina grew short-tempered. My mother-in-law suddenly remembered appointments that took her out of town for days. Even the staff moved quieter, eyes lowered. The Rivera Empire was no longer ironclad, it was paranoid, and I was still folding napkins. In the midst of the chaos, I made a quiet appointment with a lawyer I once mentored back when I had a name in finance. Her name was Denise, and she owed me more than one favor. We met in an underground parking garage, just for the symbolism. "I'm activating the trust," I told her. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "More than ever." A year before the wedding, I had taken the settlement from a high-profile consulting exit and transferred it into a blind trust under the name of someone the Riveras would never suspect. Our longtime housekeeper, Maria. Maria had worked for the family since Lucas was a child. They loved her, trusted her, but they never paid attention to her. That was their mistake. Every few months, I'd top off the trust through cryptocurrency funnels and untraceable bonds. Maria, with her quiet demeanor and perfect records, became the legal face of a holding company that, unbeknownst to them, had been acquiring small but significant shares of Rivera Holdings through subsidiaries. Quiet purchases, unremarkable names, hidden in plain sight. Denise reviewed the documents. "You control 41%. With Lucas's shares, you'd have majority." "I don't want Lucas's shares," I said. "Then you have controlling interest, but no legal command." "I don't need command yet, just control." Maria smiled when I handed her an envelope the next morning. "You're ready?" she asked in Spanish. I nodded. The family still thought I was folding napkins. But the truth was simple. I now owned more of the Rivera legacy than any of them. The first headline broke at 6:12 a.m. Rivera Holdings under independent financial audit after anonymous tip-off. By 9:00, 2 more outlets had picked it up. By noon, a journalist had managed to get their hands on one of the early quarterly inconsistencies, Sabrina's charity fund. The public backlash was swift and sharp. Op-eds appeared with titles like Philanthropy or Personal Piggy Bank, and When Legacy Becomes Liability. Lucas stormed through the house, phone to his ear, cursing under his breath. Sabrina went radio silent. My mother-in-law spent the afternoon in her room, rereading old magazines she wasn't absorbing. The staff moved like ghosts. No one spoke to me. I baked muffins. The next day, Rivera Holdings called an emergency press conference, supposedly to reaffirm their transparency and commitment to integrity. What they didn't know was that the controlling shareholder, me, had requested a separate media presence. They expected Lucas to speak. Instead, when the curtain drew back, I stood at the podium. Flashes exploded. Microphones leaned toward me. I wore a deep navy suit, hair tied back, no wedding ring. "Thank you for being here," I began. "As the majority shareholder of Rivera Holdings, I want to personally confirm that the audit is not only real, but necessary." A murmur swept through the room. "I will not name individuals today. I don't believe in theatrics. What I do believe in is accountability, especially when trust has been violated from within." Behind me, a giant screen lit up with numbers, graphs, charts, clear timelines, everything backed by the audit results conducted independently by 2 international firms I had chosen months ago. Effective immediately, we are halting all internal transactions, freezing discretionary funds, and placing all family-related subsidiaries under third-party supervision. Questions flew. Who was I? Where had I come from? How long had I known? I answered only one. I've been watching long enough. By evening, the Rivera name trended online for all the wrong reasons. Lucas tried to call me. I let it ring. Sabrina left 6 voicemails. I didn't listen. The board convened in panic the next morning. Denise and I walked in with binders and a laptop. She spoke first, reading the bylaws aloud. Clause 19(e). In cases where controlling interest is held by an individual not currently seated, a vote of reorganization can be called without notice. I handed each member a copy of the motion. Dissolution of current leadership pending financial review and board reevaluation. "There's no precedent for this," one director said. "There wasn't," I replied. Denise opened a folder. "Here are 3 video clips of misappropriation, signed expense authorizations without budgetary approval, and internal emails suggesting concealment of data." I leaned in. "I'm not asking. I'm documenting." They voted 7-1. Sabrina abstained. Lucas wasn't there. An hour later, I received a call from my mother-in-law. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. Her voice was clipped but calm. "Madeline, you've made your point. I think it's time we handled this. Humanely." "Humanely," I repeated. "You forged my signature, planned my exit, erased my name from my own career, and now you want mercy. This will ruin the family." I paused, then said, "Then you shouldn't have built a family on a lie." "You're just a daughter-in-law," she hissed. "No," I said, "not anymore, and not ever really." Then I hung up. That night, I filed paperwork to finalize the last stage of my control: rebranding. Rivera Holdings had always sounded clinical to me, cold, like something built by and for men in tailored suits and empty hearts. I wanted something else. Not vengeance, not pride. Identity. The new name would appear on every contract, every building, every partnership from that day forward. Alondra Group. My mother's middle name. The woman who raised me on 2 jobs and 0 apologies. Who taught me that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. Power has a strange echo. It doesn't roar the way you think it will. It hums, low, constant, relentless. After the board vote, after the press conference, after the contracts and firings and headlines, there was no moment of triumph, no dramatic swell of music, just silence. And in that silence, I heard something unexpected. Myself. The days blurred into schedules and signatures, meetings with lawyers, interviews with PR strategists. Journalists called me a quiet storm, the most dangerous woman in finance, the faceless heiress who rewrote legacy. None of them knew how much of that legacy had already worn through. I sat in a penthouse office overlooking a city that bowed to my signature, but when I looked at my reflection in the window, I didn't see a woman who had won. I saw someone who had disappeared. One afternoon, as I scrolled through investor memos and tax revisions, my phone buzzed. A name flashed across the screen I hadn't seen in years. Jade. She had been my roommate in college, the kind of friend who knew every version of me. Early mornings before finals, late nights after breakups, everything in between. I hesitated, then answered. "You finally picked up," she said. Her voice was the same, warm, sharp, unfiltered. We talked for an hour. She asked about Lucas. I told her he was quiet now. She asked about the company. I told her it was no longer called Rivera. Then she paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you still laugh the way you used to?" I didn't answer, because I remember how loud it was, how ugly and honest and full of life, and I don't hear it anymore, Maddie. Something cracked. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a slow, crumbling breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for months. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, not the glass in my office, the one in my old apartment, the one I hadn't sold. I kept the keys in my coat pocket like a secret escape hatch I never used until now. I flicked on the light. The place was dusty, stale, but the reflection staring back at me was worse. My eyes were sharper, yes, my posture straighter, but my mouth, it had forgotten how to curve. I cried. Not out of grief, not for the things I'd lost. I cried because I couldn't remember why I started. I had fought so hard, moved so precisely, survived so completely that I'd left myself behind. In the following days, I started to notice things I'd ignored. How I hadn't read a book for pleasure in over a year. How I hadn't danced barefoot in the kitchen. How no one had touched me without calculation. One morning, Maria brought me coffee and lingered. "You don't smile anymore," she said. "I don't have time," I answered. She looked at me for a long moment. "Then make time, Mija, or the power you hold will start holding you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Later that week, while reviewing archived emails for final asset transfers, I stumbled across a folder titled Family Event Proposal. It was dated a year before the wedding. Inside was a spreadsheet outlining the Rivera family's PR strategy for a stabilizing marriage. I read line after line. There were media contacts, projected engagement increases, reputation boosts for the family foundation, and at the center, my name, Madeline Rivera, under the column labeled Controlled Variable. I closed the laptop and sat very still. They never wanted me. But worse, a part of me had still wanted them. That realization hit harder than any betrayal. Through all the plotting, all the victories, some stubborn part of me still craved belonging, still waited for someone to say, "You did good, Madeline. You're one of us." And that sliver of hope, buried deep, had held me hostage far longer than any contract. I thought I'd outplayed them, but I'd also become them. And that I couldn't forgive. The next morning, I drafted a letter, not a resignation, a relinquishment. I handed it to Denise, who read it twice. "You're stepping down?" she asked. "I'm stepping out." "They'll spin it as surrender." "Let them." She hesitated. "What will you do?" I smiled. Not politely, not carefully, but honestly. I'll remember who I was before they tried to erase me. I made one last change before I left. In the official registry, where it listed my legal name as Madeline Rivera Alvarez, I filed a revision. No hyphen, no attachments, just Madeline Alvarez. The name my mother gave me before anyone thought I needed fixing. I disappeared the way smoke leaves a room, slowly, then suddenly, with no trace of where it came from. 1 week after I stepped down, my name vanished from executive rosters. No goodbye statement, no final interview. I let the headlines chase their own tails. "Where is Madeline Rivera?" they asked. And when they didn't find answers, they moved on. That was the point. I deleted every account. Instagram, LinkedIn, even the encrypted inboxes and secret finance dashboards I had once lived inside. I changed my number, bought a new phone. I wasn't running. I was returning to something smaller, quieter, real. The silence was intoxicating. For weeks, I let the world speak without me. I wandered cities alone, spent mornings in old bookstores, afternoons walking trails where no one recognized my face. In a cafe tucked inside an alley in Lisbon, I saw a woman staring at her coffee, wedding rings spinning slowly on the table. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I knew that look, the weight of being someone else's reflection. And that was when I knew what to do. Back in the States, I met with Denise one last time. I asked her to help me establish a fund. Not in my name, not linked to a laundry group. No face, no fame, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, just capital, quiet capital. Designed to do one thing, rescue women who were, like I once was, trapped behind manicured smiles and high-rise walls. We called it the Renewal Foundation. No press release, no interviews. The branding was minimal, just a single geometric symbol, an unbroken diamond loop. Applications were invite-only. Referrals came through therapists, shelters, even housekeepers. The women didn't have to prove their suffering. They didn't need to explain their bruises, emotional or otherwise. They just had to say one sentence: "I'm ready to come back to myself." The fund covered legal support, relocation, identity restoration, vocational reinvention. Everything I had to claw together with blood and silence, they would now have with structure and care. And still, no one knew it was me. 6 months passed. Then came the article. It started as a Medium post, anonymous, titled, "The Cost of Survival in a Marriage That Didn't Kill You But Almost Did." I didn't write it, but it might as well have been ripped from my ribs. "I didn't marry for power," the piece read, "but I learned how to hold it, not to dominate, but to keep them from taking me again." It spread like wildfire. Women reposted it. Men debated it. Activists quoted it. One politician referenced it in a speech on economic abuse, and buried in the comments was a link, a single symbol, the diamond loop. Applications tripled. Maria texted me, even though I hadn't heard from her since I left. "They're calling it a revolution, quiet but loud in all the right places." I smiled. Meanwhile, the Rivera family unraveled in public. Sabrina was investigated for tax fraud. Lucas stepped down from 2 boards under mounting pressure. My mother-in-law gave an interview claiming she'd been manipulated from within, her voice shaking behind rehearsed regret. But I didn't feel satisfaction, not in the way people expect revenge to taste. It was emptier than that, because by then, they weren't even relevant. I had outgrown the game. Instead, I returned to something even quieter, teaching. At a community center in a city where no one knew my last name, I began hosting weekly sessions. No press, no cameras, just word of mouth and chairs arranged in a circle. The first class was small, 8 women. We didn't start with stories. We started with silence. I asked them to sit with it, not as punishment, but as power. Then I wrote one sentence on the board. "When did you stop being allowed to finish your own thoughts?" No one answered for a full minute. And then they didn't stop talking. Each week, more arrived. Some still married, some freshly escaped, some with bruises visible, some with damage buried beneath degrees and designer shoes, all of them trying to remember who they were before the world told them who to be. I didn't tell them who I was. I didn't need to. They didn't come for me. They came to find themselves. And as I walked home each night, under skies that no longer weighed down my name, I thought, this is power, not the kind they fear, the kind they never saw coming.